Hello, Internet. This is Sophia. Today I have a special guest with me, the Reverend Dr. C. Don Jones is an elder in full connection in the Holston Conference of the United Methodist Church. He has been active in ministry for over 25 years, and you can find his blog, Glorious Life, at the URL you can see below, and if you don't want to type it in, don't worry. It's going to be in the video description after this broadcast is over. There's a slight error in the version of the URL that's in the video description now, but don't worry. Even if you follow that link, it'll correct itself, and that minor error itself will anyways be fixed after this broadcast is over. Didn't have a chance to get a nice QR code. Sorry about that, Don.
It's all right.
Yeah, so anyways, tell me a bit about yourself. What do you do exactly?
Well, as an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church, I am charged with several responsibilities, mostly dealing with leading a local congregation, being a pastor, officiating the sacraments, and taking responsibilities in the broader church too, just beyond the local congregation. And there's about 3 pages in our book of discipline that gives all these descriptions of things I do, but I won't read that to you here.
So could you tell me how you got into ministry?
Well, I'm not good at anything else. I just remember Gene Wilder in Frisco Kid saying God made him a rabbi because he thought he had enough farmers. In my case, I've always been interested in philosophical and theological issues. And when I was an undergraduate at the University of Tennessee, I took a couple of courses. One was early Christian fathers and mothers, but early Christian writers. And I've decided religion was actually a good place to go career-wise. And the rest, as they say, is history. The wonderful thing that happened with that was just a few years ago, I ran into the professor who taught that course 30 years ago. And we're now good friends. We work on several projects together now. So that's been a nice thing. And I have served in churches from North Carolina to Oklahoma and all up and down eastern Tennessee.
Okay. So how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected your church, whether at the local congregation or at the denominational level?
At the denominational level, the real major effect has been that our general conference had to be postponed. It was originally scheduled for May, and we have a general conference meet every 4 years. But this time, it had to be postponed, and the denomination was looking at some major legislation about how we would stay together or how we would separate and how many groups we might separate into. But that's been postponed until September of 2021 now. That's our tentative date. It could be earlier than that. It could be later.
Depending on how.
So that's a big deal. Now, in our conference, our local area that's overseen by a bishop, our bishop closed all of our churches beginning March 15th, Sunday, March 15th. So the last time I've actually attended church was March the 8th. And we're still don't know when they'll reopen. A lot of our pastors, a lot of my colleagues have been scrambling to become very creative on how they would broadcast their worship services. You know, how will we do this without actually getting together? How will musicians do their work? How will the pastors deliver their sermons? Can we even do sacraments online? These are big issues that have come up. I have been amazed as to how that's been adapted in various places by so many of my colleagues. And of course, the United Methodist Publishing House, our educational department, has sent out all sorts of tips and ideas on how to do these things. Probably the one thing that I think is the most important, though, is that while we've had to change some of our ministries, most of the ministries in outreach, such as food banks and other ways of helping people financially or with material goods, those are still going on. They're just doing it differently. One friend of mine at the church he serves, people won't be coming into the church building to pick up their boxes of food. He's going to be loading it into their cars as they come under the awning of their church building in their parking area. He's adapting. All of us are.
So anyway, so how has your local congregation been doing? Have you been broadcasting your services?
Right now, I am not assigned to a church as pastor. Buzz Trexler is the pastor at Green Meadow United Methodist Church, where I attend, and which is listed as my charge conference. But I am not. I don't actually have any responsibility in that church other than to uphold its ministries. And it's been interesting. He's done a wonderful job. Of course, he's more media savvy than most, having been a newspaper editor.
But I definitely would like to congratulate you all on definitely following safety over tradition. I made a hashtag for it, safety over tradition. So which I'm trying to get this hashtag to catch on so it can apply to all holidays, secular and religious, between now and whenever this COVID-19 threat is eliminated. And I definitely thank y'all for following this.
Well, it's traditions are what they are. They have meaning. And of course, in the three Abrahamic faiths of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, gathering together is a huge part of what it means to worship and be in community with one another. Of course, we went through Easter staying home. That just doesn't happen. But this year we did it. I understand extended families gather for the Seder, and this year that was discouraged. But these are things people look forward to every year, and letting go of them was difficult. Emotionally, psychologically, and just as a concern for the health of the body of believers. Other traditions, for instance, that grow up within our denomination, when we celebrate the sacrament of Holy Communion, we have a part in it which is called passing the peace. And that is where we kind of greet one another. We say hello, we say the peace of Christ be with you, we shake hands, we hug, we sometimes talk a little too long, and then everybody goes back to where they were sitting to continue on with before we celebrate the Eucharist itself. And I remember March 1st, we celebrated Holy Communion, and basically did the whole touch elbow thing, as we encouraged everybody to do that, then regular shaking hands and what have you, because we were already hearing about how we may have to wash our hands 20 seconds every half hour, every time we touch something or touched our faces or whatever. We were already hearing that, and our congregation started that practice very quickly. And then when the bishop gave us basically gave us an order that closed the churches, that stung a bit because it was Lent. We knew Easter was on the way, but initially the idea was we would close it for 2 weeks and then we could reopen in time for Easter. But as you know, the infection rates went up, the death rates went up, and it became more imperative to never get together for the safety and health of everyone around us.
Would you consider the shelter-in-place orders that prevent in-person church services to be an affront to your religious liberty as an American?
There's a difference in shelter in place versus forbidding religious worship. Shelter in place was across the board, except for certain essential services. And religious persecution would come up as saying, you may not, under any circumstances, worship. That would include not only your church buildings, but your homes, your prayer closets, as the Pentecostals would say, and any function like that. To forbid the practice of one's religious work in one's religious life is the persecution. To make a temporary order saying, please do not do this, that is not persecution. That is a matter of, as you said, safety over tradition. And it's safety for this, it really is for the sake of everyone else around you, not just for yourself.
Now, what would you say to those who feel that certain states are tyrannically going overboard with their shelter-in-place restrictions?
Well, not to get too partisan, but I've noticed that the states where most of the complaints have been against have had Democratic governors. And so there is some targeting going on. It's a strategy. But the claim is tyranny when there's no tyranny. It's not tyrannical to govern. And that's an important aspect of what we're doing. I know that a protest in Tennessee occurred, though. We have a Republican governor. But it wasn't as large as, say, what happened in Michigan or was said to, or people wanted to happen in Virginia. So, but I do know of demonstrations in Chattanooga and Nashville and I don't remember if there was even a large one in Knoxville area where I live. But I think the governments have a responsibility to ensure the safety of their citizens. It can be overstepped, but at the same time, during the Second World War, people on the East Coast and West Coast of the United States were asked to put blackout curtains on the windows of their homes for the sake of safety. I don't think that was the government being tyrannical at all.
Now, what would you say to people who tell you that concern over COVID-19 is overblown because it's mostly the elderly and people with underlying conditions who are dying from it?
Well, that's the thing, is that St. James in the New Testament says that pure religion, undefiled before God, is to care for the widows in their loneliness and in their suffering, and the orphans. So, in a sense, James is saying, in essence, I should say, James is saying to take care of those that are most vulnerable, to see to it that they're cared for, that whatever your religious practices may be, as a Christian, your first religious duty is to those people who are the most vulnerable. He didn't say pure religion undefiled before God is baptism and sacraments.
Some people have asserted that what is going on right now is spiritual warfare. How would you react to that assertion?
Oh, well, the language of spiritual warfare has been around for about 30 plus years. And of course, that it's been my whole time in ministry, I've heard those terms, spiritual warfare. The assumption in that, especially among Pentecostal and charismatic Christians, is that there are a great number of demonic entities influencing many people, many ways, to cause many problems in the world and cause as much problem as possible. And the idea of spiritual warfare then is to stand against that. That's what most people think of as spiritual warfare when they talk about it. There is a spiritual warfare that goes on, though, and that is where we stand against injustice, we stand for compassion, and we stand to see to it that people are cared for, and that most of all, that what we do is not just to right wrongs and correct injustices, but to grow in love, to speak the truth in love, growing into the full understanding of the body of Christ. And that is a struggle within ourselves as well as among each other.
For anyone who hasn't been with us from the beginning, my special guest today is the Reverend Dr. C. Don Jones. So anyways, history has shown that every pandemic, whether for better, for worse, or both of them, has substantially changed society. What are some changes that you are hopeful, as in best case scenario, hopeful that you might see in society as a result of this pandemic?
As far as physical changes, I think remote working will be more common, as opposed to people gathering in a place where they don't necessarily have to gather to do their jobs. Communication systems will probably be improved. Better access to internet and our phone service and other things, communications. I think probably we'll see a sort of depopulation, not a great one, but a depopulation of the major cities. Because if more people can work remotely, then they will move out of the cities where infections are more likely to, infection rates are more likely to climb. But what I want to see most is a different, or rather, let's say it this way, a reconfiguration of our supply chains. For instance, let's talk about the dense packing of animals, farming animals. How much are we flirting with the next pandemic like that? Let's talk about the fact that we have farmers now slaughtering animals that can't be sold. We have food being turned under in the ground, and we've got to find a better way to distribute food that way than what we've been doing. Because what is broken down is the supply chain, and it's a problem.
And on the flip side, are there any changes that you fear might come in society as a result of this pandemic that you would rather not happen?
Well, an increase in paranoia would definitely be something that could happen, has happened in some areas. The people who are afraid the government's turning tyrannical, for instance, that is a paranoia that comes into play. Fear of, we're not afraid of the disease, we're afraid of the government. And I think that could make things much, much worse. And if it settles into the hearts and minds of people, then our situation is very dire. Because we don't trust each other.
And one more question I have for you. How would you rate President Trump's performance in the face of this crisis?
I try to put myself in his place. I've been the leader of a church. I've been the leader of, a church is a much smaller situation than the country, less people involved. But I have done a lot of what do we do in this crisis? How do we lead? How do we get people motivated to deal with the situation? I guess on a larger scale, the one I saw was when I was serving in Cott County, which neighbors Sevier County, and the fires in Gatlinburg a few years ago. I saw there was great coordination. In our community, it was a small community, but there was a great deal of coordination to help, especially with people who were displaced from their homes to get supplies to them. Churches worked together, and people who were not part of churches just contributed to these efforts. We sent, we would collect snacks and bottles of water for firefighters at the volunteer fire department to send to them. We actually had two fires. We had one in Cott County at Nettie Mountain, which was near me, and then of course Gatlinburg. They needed their help, as much help as they could get there too. So how would I rate President Trump on this? I think he could have done a lot better, but I'm not in that position. And I know what it is to try and know what you're going to do when you don't know what's needed the most. You can be very insulated and very lonely as a leader. He doesn't in the White House, he doesn't see what goes on in the ICU and the emergency rooms. And I remember not too long ago, I saw the last season. I think it was the second season of The Crown, where Winston Churchill did not understand the great smothering fog that hit London for 4 days. He did not understand the health crisis until he was in a hospital, and then knew that he had to do something, and did the best he could, using his experience from being prime minister during World War II. And if we're insulated and are kept away from seeing the need, then we will make mistakes, big mistakes, because we just simply don't know and we're not moved. One thing I really do appreciate about President Trump, and I'm not a supporter of his reelection, and I was not a supporter of him being elected. One thing I do appreciate is that he saw his brother die of alcoholism, and it made him understand the suffering that's involved in addiction and the need for addiction treatment and help in those areas. And he has done some things in those areas, contributed to research and other issues surrounding those two things. And I do appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much. Our special guest today has been Reverend Dr. C. Don Jones. The link to his blog, Glorious Life, can be found in the video description area of this video if you visit it at its main home on YouTube. You can, anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And leave a comment below and share this video with your friends. And until next time, see ya.
Take care.